Took me a while to get this. Great to see so many of you interested in this Linnaforum and the development of the waterfront area. I can tell you as a representative of people from my nation, it's also an area we'd like to see being developed when you come out of the ferry and you have to find your way to the city center and then go back with, you know, sometimes pulling some stuff behind you. It's not very nice. So glad to see that change. So I've been asked to come here and kind of inspire also Tallinn from examples from Finland, what we're doing, what's current in Finnish planning, to give you some ideas and why your work is relevant. So there already was an introduction about what I do, but I want to pinpoint this Pro Helsinki 2.0. It's important stuff that I work with, mainly on my free time in Helsinki, that we do urbanist advocacy, and we try to bring ideas how cities could change to be more kind of, that they would meet contemporary quality of life kind of measures. But to the topic. So in Finland, we have, say, from the mid-20th century onwards, the cities have been rapidly urbanizing. We kind of started then, and the pattern of that has been, you could say, kind of like a outwards directed urban dispersal that's been happening. But in the last about 10 years or so, there's been a big shift to that pattern, and that's now making planning departments think hard about what are new projects that they should be doing. And this can be characterized by inwards directed growth in cities, and then also polarizing growth. So some cities are growing much, much more than others. And there's a few characteristics that I'll share now to give you a picture of what's going on. So firstly, there's, if you take the stats from 2010 to 2014, only 80 municipalities out of over 300 attracted young people. That's 15 to 24-year-olds. So there's only 18 municipalities where there were more people, young people moving in than leaving, and that's about 10% of all Finnish municipalities. And in absolute numbers, Helsinki was the top destination, and in relative numbers, Tampere was most attractive. And if we look at inwards directed growth, if you take the example from the urban region or the urban area of Turku, around the millennium, the change of the century, about the center city, the Turku is in the middle, about 10 to 20% of the growth of that urban region went to the city of Turku, so the rest of us kind of outwards dispersal. But if you take the recent stats, it's turned completely, and now in some years it's almost 90% of the city region growth is in the center city. And you can also look at housing markets. At the same time, inner city housing in big cities is never been so expensive, and at the same time, banks have now made claims that there's about 1 million homes in Finland. It's about 1/3 of all Finnish homes that are kind of in the countryside mostly, that there's so little demand that they're not going to give housing mortgages anymore. So you can't get a loan if you want to buy a house there. It's very difficult. So that's just clearly a shift of how Finns want to live. And I'm going to go through some of the basic drivers that's causing this shift and what our cities are doing to adapt, and also some challenges that they're facing when they're doing that. And then I'll share some thoughts that are very closely linked to what Eva just told you about what are the possibilities of doing in the future to keep following that change. So first, the drivers. And one of them is connected to demographics. So firstly, there's the sort of natural geography of population growth is already so much centered on cities that if no one moved anywhere from one municipality to another, they just stop moving, still we'll see considerable growth in most city areas in the next decades. But Finland is also getting older or aging. So the generations who built this kind of living patterns you see in this picture, they're now in numbers moving back into city centers to live near services because they want to be, you know, not so disconnected from everything. Maybe they can't drive anymore. What's also happening is Finland is becoming more multicultural, and the ongoing European refugee crisis kind of implicates that clearly. So in the Helsinki region we'll see, or we're projected to see, about twice as many immigrants in the next 15 years as now. So that's changing very quickly. And also, these new Finns, they're not going to want to live in places like this. They usually want to live close to their peer networks, which are already in cities, and where they're kind of more connected to the rest of the world. And finally, there's a new generation entering the picture strongly. I don't know if you heard this term millennials, but it's a lot of in planning debates now around the world. But I like to call it the bottom third of the age pyramid, so the younger bit. And this is a very new kind of generation in Finland. They're the first one that grew up without having really connections to rural lifestyles. So they all already have lived all their lives more or less in a kind of urban lifestyle. And there's no kind of, does it look like they're going to change and go back to farming? So, and they also grew up with the internet. They grew up with global media culture. They grew up with less borders than ever. So they're very socially kind of networked around the world. They have global concerns, climate change, everything. So they're also not very much interested in living in this kind of pattern that we have to own a car and drive everywhere. They want to be in more urban spaces. What's also changing is how and where we work. One of the things is that we don't manufacture stuff anymore. So in Finland, about 10% of the labor force is dealing with manufacturing, and the rest of us, we're working with services, research, design, development, and all that kind of stuff. And this is kind of, you need to be highly educated usually, and it's a very niche market typically what you're focused on, and you need to be in urban areas where you can kind of have intermingling with other fields to add more expertise into different projects and so forth. We also have new technology now that has freed us from the desk job. So nowadays with cloud services, I don't need to sit at the office all day. I can go work in the cafe next door because I don't need all the paperwork is in the cloud. So that has given us tremendous flexibility in work, but it's also bringing us together because we still need face-to-face contact. So that's not gone anywhere. And then the drivers of the economy are the so-called creative class, and now with the emerging millennial generation, they also now want to work in very different environments than we did, say, 20 years ago. They want more these places that have kind of vibrancy. They don't want to have their work life so strongly separated from their free time life. They want it to be more mixed. So what's happening is that this kind of science parks you see in this picture that we kind of built outside of cities that are very isolated, monofunctional. They have like one research institution where you drive and then you innovate for 8 hours, then you drive back in your free time. And these places are dying out. For example, in the Helsinki region, we have about 1 million square meters of empty office space. And a big chunk of it is in places like this, outside of the city center, that companies nor workers are finding ideal for their work environment anymore. So work's changing. And then we're also changing as consumers, and I mean that in kind of the broadest sense of the word. We want to consume experiences, services, entertainment, culture, all that you can typically find in urban surroundings. And we also want to live nearer to them than ever. You don't want to travel far to go to the restaurant, for example. And an interesting twist to this is now with the millennials and the advance of social media, there's a kind of new proliferation of self-organized events, especially where in big cities in Finland we have so much of this stuff that people just organize events for each other to have a kind of social experience, but also create settings that make the city nicer. And this is also a big attraction to bring people to cities, and also you can't really do this kind of stuff if you don't have any people, so it happens in urban surroundings. So what do these changes mean for planning? Well, I like to think of them as kind of societal developments that create demands for urban planners, that how we should shape our cities to kind of adapt and keep up with this change. So I'll go over a few types of projects that we're doing in connection to some of the main demands, and then highlight some challenges that we're facing, which you might also then face here in Tallinn if you're doing similar kind of stuff. And one of them is we need to give priority to building connections and adding density over this kind of dispersed land use patterns. So in this picture you see two types of ways of housing 300 people, and we're moving to the model on the right extensively. And the kind of stuff cities are doing, one of the first things is building on brownfield sites. So because a lot of this of our industry has gone to China for cheap labor or just for other reasons move outside of the city, then now we have big obsolete kind of industrial areas or harbor areas, and we're now making them as new neighborhoods. But a newer thing we're doing is that we're kind of trying to get rid of the barriers that we have in our urban fabric. And in this context, we're starting to look at urban highways that built in the mid 20th century and onwards that cut neighborhoods off from each other. And then also train stations, because in Finland we actually have a very funny way that we developed our train stations. You can see in this picture that usually we have a station and then a very big empty kind of area around it. So not very often do you have something right next to your train station. And now we want to change that. So the types of stuff we're doing is turning these highways into boulevards, so making them as regular streets again. So you can have new houses along these corridors, and you can actually cross the street. You don't have to go over or under, you can just have a normal crossing. And that allows us to add more density and also bring a connection between two sides of the city. And with these train stations, we're starting to build deck structures that connect two sides of the station. And then we add functions on top to make it more multifunctional than just have it serve railway purposes. And we're also building new light rail systems and connections, mainly now in the cities of the bigger cities, so Helsinki, Tampere, and Turku. And in this context, it's not just about public transportation, it's also about creating nodes. You see in this picture, nodes where you can add more density and also fill gaps that you have between existing neighborhoods. So this project is from Tampere, and they're really far actually with planning this new tram line or tram system, and they should make a decision at the end of this year if they're going to build it or not. And if the council says yes, then the plans are so far that they can start building immediately. And I don't think that they're going to say no. It's my hunch. So what are some problems where cities are facing when they're doing this? Well, money is obviously a problem. If we do big projects like build decks over railway stations, it's expensive. And now that the economy is a bit down, it's not that much public money floating around anyways. And is it the city of Helsinki should just pay for this, or also the national government? Or can we apply for EU funding? Are there other funding models? We don't know. It's a constant debate. Where do we get the money and who benefits? So that's kind of slowing projects down. Then administration is a problem. In our current planning system, when you do something, you have to make extensive evaluations about different point of views, if this is good or bad. There might be regulations that are not compatible with the ideas that we now have. They're also stalling projects very much. And then you have to have political support, which is not always easy because not everybody thinks the same way. So you have to build coalitions to get on board your project to make it move forward. So that's an important. If everything else is well, you still need to have politicians understand. Another demand is mixing uses. So we want to get rid of those monofunctional areas now and start to have more places that integrate work, housing, entertainment, and kind of create that synergy that we're lacking in many places. And Finnish cities are very much picking up on this. And this project is from Kuopio, kind of central eastern Finland. And here there's a kind of this monofunctional campus area right next to the city center. The University of Eastern Finland has some facilities there. It's kind of cut off by a highway and everything. And now what the city wants to do is extend the city center kind of towards that direction. They want to add more educational functions. They want to add some other stuff to create that surrounding that could be attractive to the new creative workers and create that bump and meet effect to happen over there. So this is like a first rendering of how it could look like, but we don't know yet. We're also mixing other uses, for example, commercial uses and housing. And we like to call these projects nowadays hybrid projects, where, for example, if we have a building where you have office space and apartments, we call it a hybrid building, and think of it as a new innovation, which obviously it really isn't. And but we're doing stuff like this. This is from Kalasatama in Helsinki. So that's a brownfield site on the eastern edge of the inner city where Helsinki is building a new neighborhood. They already built a metro connection and or a station. The metro was already there. And now they want to make a new center. It would be a big shopping mall that also incorporates apartments and offices, have big towers, and they're already building this. There's a big hole in the ground, and so I think it should be ready in a couple of years if nothing happens. But what are the problems we're facing in this? Well, first of all is that even though we have this idea of mixing uses, we're not doing it in a very open manner always. So like you saw in that example, we like to concentrate things indoors, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It's not the idea always about mixing uses. And this trend also leads to bigger and bigger projects, which then tracks back to that other problems about funding, administration, getting political approval. So we often try to make too big projects out of these. And then in terms of, like, for example, what they're doing in Kuopio, I'm not always sure that they're really following the intent of where the creative workers are inspired to work, because they're usually already going somewhere. They're finding new spaces where to work. And then I think in an organic manner, you should kind of follow them and then try to make use of that. But in many cases, I feel that we're still doing this, that we plan, okay, let's do a new innovation district, which is a term Bruce Katz has kind of launched from the Brookings Institute when he's talking about these new kind of work areas today. So the city might plan for a new area, and then they think, okay, now they want to go here, you shall innovate in this area. And it might not work if it's not kind of matches to the needs of the creative workers. But then a third demand is much connected to what Eva talked about. We need to have more quality streets, more quality public spaces. And this is because when these kind of softer sides of life are becoming more important when we're choosing where we live and where we work, then also the built environment has to kind of adapt to that and follow up. It also needs to be more soft in a way. So Finnish cities, they also are catching up on this. They're adding more people space, taking away space that's now dominantly being used by cars. And this is a project that they're doing in Tampere. They cut off half of the main street from private cars. They're doing like a 2-year test. So they cut off from private cars, buses can still go, and taxis. And then they're making the lanes narrower, and they're adding this kind of people space, benches. They didn't put grass, but they put green kind of carpets, so it looks like grass because it's temporary. And now they're waiting for 2 years and see what happens. They follow, are people happy there? Are the shopkeepers happy and everything? And then they do an evaluation and see if we should make this change permanent or bring it back for cars. And we're also, in many places, introducing the urban block as a new building block for our urban fabric, so that we could have these surroundings where we can make inviting streets and so forth. And I assume many of you have taken the ferry to Helsinki and gone to the West Harbor. So this picture is, the terminal buildings are just here, and this is the project area of Jätkäsaari, and that's one place that we're trying to make these new urban blocks. And so next time you go, you can go have a tour and see what it looks like. It's not so inviting in many places yet, but maybe in the future. And problems, well, first of all, there's the mall problem. If we concentrate things indoors, we're not going to have quality streets because everything is inside big buildings. But when we look at those urban blocks, for example, our construction industry hasn't really caught up also with this change. So they're kind of used to making these suburban building designs from the last decades. And now yes, they want to build them in urban areas, but they haven't changed the design. So it looks often that you kind of cramp the suburban building into a more smaller place, and it usually doesn't create very inviting streetscapes. And generally, since we haven't built nice plazas and everything for the past 60 or 70 years, there's a big lack of expertise in doing this kind of stuff. So I'm also kind of hoping that maybe like Eva could also swing by Helsinki and give us a few tips on how to improve ours. But there's a little bit more to this now that is very connected to what you're doing also here in Tallinn. Now, when you look at the problem side of all these projects I went through, the overarching thing is that our planning system is kind of designed for another era than today's planning demands. So there's a very heavy regulatory framework, stops projects. The funding models are outdated. What else? It's generally systematic. It's a systemic problem to have this kind of new era urbanist projects go forward. It's not easy in the system. But another problem is that it's not all about infrastructure or modifying infrastructure. Planning is a lot about people. So, and there's a lot of people in different, not just residents, but people who are working with planning, making decisions about planning. And many people have grown up with a very different kind of view of the world. They're hardwired to think otherwise. Their perception of quality projects is very different. So it creates tensions around all these types of projects. They're always someone's pulling them in the other direction, even though if you know how the world is changing, and you know this is the way we should go, it's not easy. Change is not easy to achieve. So there's a couple of things that I want to highlight that could help us move these projects forward, and one of them deals with public participation. I think we should work really, really hard to kind of re-establish ties between planning and people. And in this context, there's two things we should at least start to focus on. And one of them is that we should place the emphasis of participation or public consultation projects into the beginning phase. So right now we're often doing it so that we first design something, then we show it to you that, look, is this good? Please give us your comments. And then often nothing changes. They say, okay, we heard them, but they did not understand anything. So we'll just keep this as it is. And a better way would be kind of focus on starting with a blank canvas, moving towards co-creation so that we work together to make the content that's in our plans. And another thing is that we should kind of make use of the variety of different digital tools that we now have to connect with the younger people, especially because often if you have a, say, public consultation in a school classroom, only old people show up and they only have one perspective of what's important in life. But with digital tools, we can connect to much, much wider audiences, and we can crowdsource solutions or problems in different places. So we should definitely make use of this. And by the way, this is we're now doing a project around the main railway station in Helsinki, where we use this map-based questionnaire to ask people how they move in the area, what's good, what's bad. And now we had a lot of people respond to us, and now based on those comments, we're making a kind of strategy how this area could change, and then kind of challenge the city on like, look, so many people think like this, maybe you should start doing something. But another perspective is that we should start treating citizens as a resource, and especially since we're having this do-it-yourself culture is getting stronger. We have proactive citizens who want to create change, make their neighborhoods better. We should really make use of that. And this picture is from Tampere, where it's the making of an do-it-yourself skate park. And the story behind this is that there's a group of skateboarders who want to have better skateboarding facilities in Tampere, but the city is not doing anything. So then they got tired of waiting, said, well, screw it, let's do our own skate park. And they just started collecting bottles to get money, and they've, you know, made some calls like from two friends. We know your dad has a truck who could bring us some stuff to build. Can we please use it, and so forth. And amazingly, they built a complete skate park just on their own. And it became a real big success, and it got a lot of media attention. And then what happened afterwards is now the city of Tampere is using these skateboarders as consultants in projects to make new skate parks. And they just recently opened one that's claimed to be the nicest skate park or the best skate park in Finland, and some people say it's the best in the Nordic countries. So with this kind of analogy in mind, we should, when we're trying to do these types of projects where we bring change to the urban environment, we should really think about making partnerships with these kind of proactive citizens and citizen groups, because they can bring their needs on the table. So it's really hard to say no to projects when you can see that there's actual residents behind them who are kind of excited about change. So it's proof that this is a real thing that matters to people. And then also, we should kind of get over this idea in the age of the internet and social media, where you can exchange examples and knowledge is everywhere, that the planner knows everything. So there might be citizen groups that know much, much more about specific problems than planners do. So it'd be kind of wasteful not to have them on board projects. So how does this all relate to what we're doing now in Tallinn? Well, the thing is that these are developments that are happening all over the world, especially in Europe and North America. So Tallinn is not immune to this kind of change. The same societal changes are happening here little by little. And so it's very forward-thinking to start thinking about how can we make areas in and around the city center more attractive for younger people, people who want to work there, and so forth. And I actually, now during these 2 days, a lot of people have told me that, because we've been talking about this do-it-yourself aspect a lot, and a lot of people have told me that, you know, but it's not really here in Tallinn. We don't have these kind of people who want to create change. It's very difficult. But to my experience, that's not the case. At least I've been seeing. This is from Kalamaja a couple of years ago. There's already these big movements who are trying to make the neighborhood nicer. So I'm sure that there's so many people who want to be engaged in projects for change, for a better urban environment. So we should find where they are, invite them to participate, and then I think projects will be more sustainable. And soon we'll see what our groups came up with for change. And hopefully there's a lot of ideas to bring locals on board as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Timo. So I will ask the same question. Does anybody have questions for Timo? about Helsinki or about something you have experienced here during the 2 days? I would ask a question about this Kalasadama and Jätkäsaari comparison, because you were showing these towers in Kalasadama, having some kind of supermarket or some kind of mall underground, and kind of saying that this mixed use might not work so well. And then you were showing this example of reinventing the urban block. So I will just ask it so straightforward. So you are thinking the reinventing the urban block is better, or?
Yes, definitely. Actually, in this context of Kalasadama, what they're doing is that they're also introducing the urban block there. So around this central area, they're already built a few blocks. But the thing is, when you do this, that you kind of mix uses in the area on a smaller scale, in the way that you concentrate a lot of commercial in one place, then the reality with those blocks is that they don't have anything at street level. It's just, there is no shop spaces, no restaurant spaces, because the construction industry doesn't want to build them. And on the other hand, if you're a shop owner or restaurant owner, why would you want to open a restaurant next to this mega mall that will have all the services and pull people over there? So it's a very bad combination. It creates, you're kind of creating dense suburbia. It's very boring to go through. It doesn't have the qualities of a lively streetscape. So connecting mallification and urban blocks is, I don't think, like a pattern for a sustainable future.
Okay, anybody else?
Well, I have a bit of a bigger picture question. As I understand it, you're kind of talking about back to the city movement in Finland, in a way.
Yes.
But I feel like in Estonia, well, for example, there's I think it's maybe a bit different. For example, at the moment, the government is trying to launch administrative reform of the municipalities. And the huge problem that everyone kind of comes up there is about that the like the rural municipalities are becoming empty or peripheral. And that makes me wonder if, I mean, this Peatänava is kind of one of a very few like urban projects in a way. Like, so I'm wondering if the situation in Estonia is in some way different, or is the problems about the rural spaces? Is it just the kind of the ship that needs a long time to turn? Like, do you get the idea?
Do you mean that should we also make plans for these areas that are shrinking now, or?
No, I mean, do you think that the situation in Estonia, is it different from what it is in Finland, or is it that all the problems that the people feel that are coming up, is it just like the old momentum that should be changed and needs to be changed, that actually people should come to live back in the cities?
Yeah, well, so far I haven't kind of picked up any signal that things would be a lot different here. Of course, the context is somewhat different due to history, but I still don't think that the progression could go in another way, because maybe it'll come a little bit later that here generations, maybe it takes a little bit longer that you kind of see that this is not how you want to live. Like in Finland, it took us a couple of generations to kind of understand that maybe this is not for us. once you have a generation who grew up in these suburban settings, many of them start to feel that, okay, this is not really working. We want to go back. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't think it's very different. In the long run, it's the same. So it's better to kind of look forward and don't make too long-term decisions looking in the wrong way, that you kind of progress outwards dispersal. So
then, I mean, the thing that I'm wondering if there, like, it feels like, at least in the politics, this kind of initiatives are kind of a rare thing, and most of the time or most of the problems that come up in politics very often in Estonia seem to be about the rural problems. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if, like, who should be the person who changes that? Should it come up from the government or down from the citizens, or should the architects be the one who kind of try to change the discussion?
Yeah, I'd say that local governments, together with local citizen groups and so forth, they can start making change. This we also have in Finland, that sometimes depends of course on the vote, because some political parties are not so focused on the problems of cities, but the problems of the countryside. And so, for example, now we have one of those parties in power. So now cities are making a strive for doing more on their own. So kind of disconnecting themselves from the national politics, saying, okay, we want this change because our citizens are asking for it. So if the government's not going to support us, we're going to do it anyways. And that's now a current thing, especially with these funding models of planning, say, new tram lines in Helsinki. There's already a big discussion. Well, now the government said, yes, they'll fund part of it, but there was already a discussion that if they're not going to fund it, then we'll just get the money elsewhere, because we need to build it. So I think cities should do that. Just don't wait for your national government. If they're not going to help you, then just do it else on your own.
Any more comments?
Maybe just a quick question about how do you manage to get the kind of whole statical structure to discard their plans, their comfort zone, and their beliefs, to start diving into some kind of new innovative processes?
Yeah, this, I think, partly you have to make those partnerships with between kind of forward-looking citizen groups, or you could make it also with, say, if you're a private developer who kind of has this belief that you want to make these nice, more urban projects, it would be very smart for you to collaborate with citizen groups, locals, because how could the politicians say no to these projects if you have the private and the residents asking for this change? So it will be very difficult for politicians to say no if they're hardwired to think otherwise. So that's where the change has to come from.
Thank you for your speech and giving us some hints what our competitor city is doing in the neighborhood. But I wanted to ask, are you just inventing yourself, or you are also learning? And if so, from where you are learning? Who are your mentor cities, or what are the best places today to learn how to do proper city planning and this engaged city planning? So do you learn, and from where you learn?
Much of the learning I've done on my own in practice by doing this advocacy projects, where we try and create change by ourselves. So we just draw different plans that we kind of crowdsource first, and then try to feed them into the planning system, and then we see where the problems are, where they stop listening to you. But there are examples. Well, Eva gave you good examples from cities where they're already a bit further in doing change like this. So I'd say I wouldn't say there's one specific place. You kind of have to look in different places where project by project they're doing change, and then kind of see what's in common, what's the common problems that they're facing, what are some of the common solutions they're doing, at least kind of strategically, and then try to build on that.
Okay, thank you, Timo.